Everybody, thank you very, very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. And of course, it's a pleasure to have our wonderful speaker here today, Tim Ward. Many of you may know Tim. Tim has worked with many executives from many different organizations, from the World Bank to the Asian Development Bank and many other organizations. But for us, we've had the pleasure of having Tim and his team teach in our training programs, and we can verify for you, we can testify that they are excellent teachers. They're masters at communication, and that is precisely why we're having them with us today. Well, we all know that life has changed for us quite dramatically because of the COVID-19 crisis. And one of the things that we're finding ourselves doing these days is having to communicate pretty much in pretty much from home all the time, pretty much. I know that that's not necessarily the newest thing for many of you, but for many of us, that is a brand new aspect of our jobs. So having said that, I'd like to just go ahead and get started, and I have some questions for Tim. And as Rebecca said, later on, we'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions that you may have for Tim, and we can go from there. So Tim, I just wanted to ask you, what is the biggest difference, to start with, between in-person and virtual presentations or meetings? What is the biggest difference?
Well, Araceli, in person, face-to-face, there's a whole lot of cues and social contracts that we have with the other person that really encourage them to listen to us, especially in the context of doing a formal presentation or even speaking at a meeting with your colleagues or those who are working for you. The whole setup of how a room is geared towards having us pay attention to the speaker. And so if someone were to stop paying attention and answer some text on their phone or something, it would be really noticeable, and we all know that's rude, so we don't do it. Now, when you're communicating virtually, that's all gone. Only way you can really use the power of connection is with your face on the screen. And that very screen you're communicating to others with is actually a huge, I call it a weapon of mass distraction, right? We look to our computers for emails, for entertainment, for all kinds of things, and we're used to switching whenever we get the least little bit bored. So if all you have is your face on the computer screen, you're almost inviting your audience to drop off and do something else that's more interesting, especially if you got one of those programs where new emails pop up on your screen. So you have to really work much harder to keep people's attention when you're working to communicate virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, I hadn't thought about that part of like the cell phones and everything. You're so right, so right. So Tim, what are the, when you watch these leaders communicate and they're doing so on virtual platforms, what are the biggest fails that you see that they do?
The first and most obvious thing is people really don't think about their screen presence. How are they appearing on the screen of their audience? And I'm going to demonstrate now some of those big fails that I've seen in almost every virtual conference or meeting that I've been a part of. Starting with light. Now, if I move these curtains away so that I've got some backlight here, you'll often see people having their meetings like this, right? They're just a shadowy figure with light in the background. So you want to make very sure that there's no light behind you, because if light is coming like this, your face is going to be in shadow, and then you'll lose the power of your expressive face. So the first rule is make sure you're aware of your background, specifically that you're not backlit, but also think about what else is going to be in the room behind you. You know, I recently had a friend send me an email with a screenshot of somebody doing a VC, and in their background was a table, and on the table were half a dozen empty liquor bottles.
Very professional looking, huh?
Think about it. Also, sometimes there may be a mirror behind you. Well, that means the audience can see everything that's in your mirror. And sometimes, especially if you're doing a VC from your home and don't have a private home office, there may be lots of entertaining things going on. So you want to control what your people are seeing on the screen. Now, the second thing is people are accustomed to having one-on-one video chats where it doesn't matter so much, but what they often do is they hold their computer the same way they would if they're writing, right? That's what I'm doing right now. I could easily type like this, but you'll notice you, the audience, are looking up at my face. And if I exaggerated, as I've seen some people do, where it's really like this, you can see it not only gives a very distorted view, but the older you get and the more wrinkly or double chins you get, that sort of becomes all that fills the screen of your audience. So you don't want to be looking down at the screen like your audience is in a hole. Instead, simply find something that you can put your computer on, like I'm going to do right now. Put it up here, tilt it like that, so that you are looking straight, not at the computer, but you're looking straight at your computer's camera. And this is the last thing that I want to mention on this topic, is we tend to look at the person on the screen. I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit. Right now, Araceli, I'm looking at your picture, which is on my screen.
Mm-hmm.
But to my audience, those of you looking at me, I seem strangely disconnected.
It's so true.
I think I'm making eye contact with you, but I'm not. If I look at the camera, now I'm making eye contact with you. Now,
That makes a huge difference.
this is hard to do because you're actually down there to me, but I'm looking at you when I look like that. So it takes some rewiring of the brain. One thing that Teresa and I tell people that can help is take a little piece of paper, fold it in half like this, and then put it on the top of your computer screen. I like to put a little happy face on it like that. To remind me, look at the camera and smile, at least until you're well trained to doing that naturally.
Oh.
Okay, so that's pretty much it for problems that you can run into with your setup. Oh.
Tim, you got a call. Jesus Christ.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle of a virtual conference. I can't be taking a phone call right now. Can I call you back, Mom? Oh, just a minute. I'm gonna have to take this. Okay. Clearly, there's a problem here, right? You've got to make sure that there's no verbal distractions for yourself in a call. And the easiest thing to do is, first of all, if you're taking this from home, make sure everybody knows. If you've got a home office, put a sign on the door that says, quiet, don't disturb. Make sure that you've got that space sealed off. But even so, you can't keep out things like fire trucks or street noise or other things. So you're better off to use something that you can plug into your computer.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Now, these things have a beautiful little microphone right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost invisible. I think it's better in black, but I only have a white one for now. Some people actually prefer the big headsets with the boom mic that comes out like this. Well, if you've invested in that and you want to use it, that's fine. But I would say for more professional contexts, it's not the best choice because it makes you look like someone at a call center who's just forwarding calls. So it doesn't make you look as much as a leader as you want to. So something like this is better. I've also asked some friends of mine who have the wireless earbuds, which is nice because then you're not tethered to a cord. And they say the problem with that is it's one more thing that can go wrong during a call. So for now, our recommendation is have a cord and make sure you're connected so that you can hear them and they can hear you without distraction. That's all.
Oh yeah, that made a huge difference when you put the headphones on. I'm wondering if I should be using mine right now. And now I'm thinking about the light, a little more conscious now, a little more self-aware. So Tim, what would you say is the most important thing that leaders need to keep in mind when communicating virtually then?
Right. Here's the big problem for leaders. They are used to thinking that all they have to do is say what's on their mind and other people will get them and will know what to do. And that's a faulty model of communication. It's a model of communication that thinks communication happens in here. But where does communication happen? It happens in there. It actually happens in the mind of your listener. So leaders shouldn't be thinking so much about what do I want to say? They should be thinking more about what do I want my audience to hear? And how can I express myself so that they get and remember what's important? They don't do nearly enough, spend nearly enough effort to do that. Something as simple as making sure that you've taken your main message and made it something catchy and concise so that it will stick with them can really, really help. And I would say one of the great masters of that was somebody that Teresa and I worked with many, many times. That's Donald Kaberuka, the former head of the African Development Bank. And he really took this lesson to heart, and he came up with some great things that are highly memorable. He talked about the bank's mission in Africa um, as being to really give Africans the Africa they want for the future. And his predecessor, the current president of the African Bank, talks about the 5 H's for 5 highs, 5 goals to achieve in Africa. By boiling it down to something really concise and succinct, better increase the odds that your audience, even those who are paid to listen to you, will really get it.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really like that way you reframed the concept of communication. It's not so much about what somebody, the leader wants to communicate or wants to say, but what do you want your audience to hear? I think that that's definitely a very helpful tool for, I'm sure, pretty much everybody, I would say. Yeah. So unfortunately, in these very difficult times, leaders have to communicate tough yet honest messages while helping people stay calm. How do you do that virtually when you just see a screen or a picture, maybe?
Yeah. Well, the truth is you can communicate with a lot of power through a screen. And the key here is your own authenticity. And that means when you speak, making that eye contact with the camera, but also really being present to yourself, really feeling not just the facts of the situation, but allowing yourself to feel the emotions of the situation, even if those may be difficult emotions to feel. I think a fabulous example right now is Governor Cuomo, who's the governor of New York State. His state right now, and especially New York City, are in the horrors of the coronavirus pandemic. Their hospitals are becoming overwhelmed. But he's there on camera every day, and he speaks to people in a way that is communicating, that he knows what the situation is. He's not just the facts, but that he is also feeling the depths of the crisis for the people that he's privileged to govern. Now, I contrast that with other leaders who seem aloof, dispassionate, dismiss the crisis. And even in some countries around the world right now, there are some leaders who are refusing to acknowledge how serious an issue it is, and offer blandishments like our people will rise to the occasion, or things like that. So that's what you have to me, that's the real key: being authentic, giving people the facts, but connecting emotionally with what those facts need. And people can read that on your face, as long as you don't have a backlight.
That's very powerful. That's very powerful. And I think you just showed it really, really well as well. You displayed it really well. Thank you. So we all know that sometimes videos can get, I don't know, they leaked, or they at the very minimum end up in some unintended hands. Does this fact, should this fact affect what or how leaders should communicate, what they should say, and how they should communicate?
Well, my conviction here is that the most effective leaders lead through credibility, and that means telling the truth. Now, that doesn't mean always telling all of the truth to everybody, especially if you're running a business. There are things which you want to deal with internally. But if you lead from the truth, then the worst that happens is other people discover that you said something that's true to some people, but haven't yet said it publicly. And you can live with that. Now, these days, I think it's also worth keeping in mind that anything you say in a VC can easily be recorded by any of the participants. So you want to be able to speak to your people honestly and truthfully, and be aware that they are going to share it. If not through a video, they'll pass your words along. So keep that keep that in mind. If you have information to share, which may happen sometimes, but is not for public consumption and you're concerned that a video might get out, don't say it on camera. Find another way to communicate it.
Very good, very good. Another question, Tim, that comes to mind is about the use of tools such as PowerPoint, for instance, when you're communicating virtually. What do you have to say? Tell us about that.
So the big and natural mistake that people make if they're in a VC and they're using PowerPoint is they have the PowerPoint fill the screen of the audience. Well, that's taking away this most powerful communicator that we've talked about, your face and your presence on camera. So make sure if you're doing this in a video conference, that your audience has the option to do split screen. And it's worth telling them, or it's worth the organizers saying, use split screen, please, for this conference so that the audience can see you and can see your PowerPoints. Now, I'll say one other thing. Most presenters have far too much text on their PowerPoints in real life presentations. When you're looking on a screen, especially if you're doing it in split screen, those bullets, they're even smaller. And you don't want to give your audience a lot of dense text that they have to squint at to try and read. Because in as much as they're struggling to read, they're not listening to what you're saying. So a good general rule is make sure your text is not dense and that it's in a font that's big enough for people to read easily, and don't read your PowerPoint. People can read faster than you can speak. So if you show a slide with a lot of text on it and you start to read it, your audience will figure out what you're doing. They'll read more quickly. They'll be done before you're finished. And then what are they going to do? Wait for you to catch up? No, they're going to check their emails and you will have lost them.
Or that phone, yes, exactly. So Tim, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would love it if you could, because I've seen you live and I know how well you do with our audience, of course. And I'd love to see if you could give us an example of how to answer a question in a virtual presentation or meeting.
Sure. You mean just what are the techniques for good answers?
Yes, or if you could give an example.
There are 3 steps to a good answer when you're thinking off your feet and you don't necessarily know what the questions are. Answer the question, back it up with a good example, and then end with a short conclusion that lets your audience know what the value of that answer is for them. So for example, if you were in a press conference and somebody asked you a question, even if you never heard of it before, rather than trying to figure out your whole answer, you could simply answer the question. Let's say it was a question about, do public utility managers and leaders have a role to play during this crisis? So you don't have that whole answer worked out, but that's okay. Use these 3 steps. Your first thing you would say is absolutely making sure that utilities are up and running and people know they can rely upon them makes a huge difference to the lives of citizens. That would be the answer. And then you could say, for example, and you, Araceli, would pull some utility leader who you know of who's been doing exactly that. Maybe they've been sending emails out, or they've been sending telephone text messages out to let their customers know about the situation in their particular country. That helps the audience go, oh yeah, this is real. It's not just theoretical. This is a real thing this person's telling me about. And then you might end by saying, in fact, then you'd conclude by saying, in fact, I take it as my personal responsibility, the thing that I can do in this pandemic to keep, let's say it's electricity, to keep the lights on, not just for our people, but for the health workers who are working around the clock to help those who are suffering from the coronavirus. That's my promise to you. We will do our best. So you can see how that really answers people's concerns and rounds out the answer.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. We are right there. I think we've taken a couple of extra minutes, but this is just a perfect way to go into answering some of the questions that our people, the audience has for us. And so I don't know if you can see the chat, Tim, but I can feed them to you if that's
sure.
If that's better.
I've turned it on now, so I'll be able to read it if you just want to direct me to which one. Maybe you should read it too for our audience members.
So I have a good question here from Chiara Giovanni that says sometimes the video connection is not possible and you need to give your presentations or speech only with your voice. Can the voice be enough, enough for good communication? Can your voice be enough for good communication?
Yes, it's not as good as both your voice and your face. And ideally, if you're doing it only by voice through something like Zoom, you'll have an icon with the picture of your face on it. That's better than nothing. That helps people at least connect a person to the words. But if you're doing voice only, you really have to work on your tone. And I would say there are two things to work on avoiding if you think that's likely for you. The first is speaking in the wrong register. We all have three registers that we can speak in. There's a sort of a head voice. People who talk high like this, if they're under stress, that's hard to listen to. It's kind of grating. And then there's a low voice. If you're really relaxed, you know, sort of like a FM radio host. And it's kind of almost difficult to listen to. It's very, very relaxed, but that's also the wrong one. The right one is in the middle. It actually makes your chest reverberate. If people want to try this at home, if you put your hand on your chest and try different voices, the one where you feel your chest vibrating like a violin case, that's the right resonance. Now I'm doing this now. When I speak with my hand right here, my hand feels like it's vibrating. You might want to try that at home, but please make sure your mics are off. So use the right tone of voice and then work to make sure you are eliminating ums and ahs. People who have that as a voice pattern are very difficult to listen to. Just to give you an example, after a while, it's hard to keep listening. So work to eliminate those if that's your natural speech pattern.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question here. From Zero to Tim. It says, thank you for the presentation. How to emotionally connect to a population which is so emotional and believes that government should offer utilities free of charge.
Well, Zaria, I don't envy you. That's the position that you're in. And the reason I don't envy you is because that's a decision that's out of your hands. That's a decision that the government has to make. And if the government has decided that's not the way they're going, and and you're in a position of having to fulfill a pay for service utility, you've got no choice. And you're also not going to make people happy. I think the best you can do is tell them that you understand their desire and that you're working to make sure as many people get connected, get services as possible under the present circumstances. But also just bear in mind, you are not going to make them happy. And they may have a legitimate political reason for wanting the kind of change that they want, depending on what your country is. But it's not your role to address that.
We have another question here from Paul. It says, is this a place where a picture is worth 1,000 words or an animation is worth 1,000 words? So
yes, if you have a PowerPoint presentation that you're using with your VC, pictures are fabulous. And I can say a few things about what makes for a good picture and a bad picture. Good pictures show people in action, doing something. The worst kind of pictures are pictures of people standing up, like after a meeting where they're all sitting shoulder to shoulder facing the camera, or people sitting around a board table looking bored. Those static photos don't actually attract an audience. But if you give people pictures of people doing something, it draws us in. It makes what you're talking about all the more real. So that's great. Now, short video clips are also really a wonderful tool, and you have to be careful to make them short. It's a fail for me if a speaker starts up by saying, I'd like to start my presentation by showing you a video. And then you see a 3-minute long company video. No, that's going to turn people off and away. So videos should not supplant the speaker. They should only support him or her. So a short clip, maybe no more than 10 seconds is usually enough. to let people see what it is you're talking about. And that really should be your metric. Will my picture help them see what I'm saying?
Mm. Thank you, Tim. We have another great question here from Kathleen that's saying, how do you engage those who are so old-fashioned that they normally would only conduct face-to-face meetings, and they have little to no desire to have these video conferencing meetings?
Well, Kathleen, I'm one of those people. I've been doing communications trainings for 25 years, and I love working face-to-face with people. The good news for you, if part of your job is to encourage them to do virtual conferences, is that's our only choice right now in many nations that are in lockdown. So we are all being forced onto a learning curve that we may not have voluntarily chosen. And I really include myself in this. But it's amazing when you start to pay attention to what works and what doesn't, how much you can actually accomplish. So it's an adjustment. Hey, look, there were a lot of people who really didn't want to give up riding a horse and get a car. We adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, if we can hang in through this pandemic and find a world on the other side, that will be a different world. And in this different world, we may discover that we're all good virtual communicators. And that may mean that if you want to go to a meeting, you don't have to fly halfway around the world. You can be just as effective speaking, listening, and interacting as if you were there in person. But think of the mileage you'd save on your old bones and the carbon you'd save from going into the atmosphere.
Kathleen, you have some pointers on how to deal with that now. We have another question from Imran. He's asking about how to manage the body language in crisis communication when one is live on media.
Right. Well, your audience is going to read your body language for the truth.
Mm.
And if your words and your body language are in conflict, the audience will trust what your body seems to be saying. So I want to give you some things that you can watch for, because you know, although you want to be authentic, you also don't want to unintentionally signal things that will cue your audience that you're not being honest. So first of all, crossing your arms. That makes you look really defensive, maybe even angry, and certainly like you're not ready to let people inside what you're really thinking. The second thing is to keep your eye contact steady and on the camera. If somebody asks you a difficult question and you go with your eyes, or even if you've got your assistant there next to them, you sort of go like this, the audience is reading the fear in your eyes, and that's all they're going to remember. So keep looking at that camera.
Wow.
And the third thing is what to do with your hands. You really want to avoid putting them together where you might start rubbing them unconsciously, you know, going like this. On the one hand, you might inadvertently look like you're some sort of evil genius. No, you don't want to do that. But also if you're fiddling with your fingers or something like that, it makes you look really, really nervous and uncomfortable. So the best thing to do is keep your hands apart if you're standing at your side or sitting on the arms of a chair. And then be sure to gesture so that your arms are doing something useful. They're emphasizing the points that you're making.
Excellent, thank you. So I'd like to take one more question, and then from the chat. But I'd like, Rebecca, could we open, after we take this next question, could we open the microphone and to some of the participants who may want to, you know, ask a question live? And please do remember that Tim has volunteered to give one or two of you advice on how to have that virtual presence. And so if you want some recommendations from Tim and you're ready to share your screen with us and everything, he'll give you some pointers on how to improve that. So let me take one more question, and then we'll open the floor to some microphone questions, even though now there's more questions in the chat. So I guess we'll see. So Tim, I have another question here from Lisa Edgar that says, any other tips about lighting when presenting from a home office? Question mark. Yeah. So when a light or lamp is needed, they seem to add shadows across the face.
Absolutely right. Yes. And there's a lot that you can do, and that is one of the biggest problems, shadows across your face. Now, none of us are Hollywood lighting directors. We're all making this up as we go, but there are some useful things to keep in mind beyond just no backlight. You do want to have a light in front of you so that light is shining on you. If it's just an overhead light, though, you will get those shadows. So single overhead light is not enough. I think natural light is best. So if it's possible to open the shades and fill the room with natural light, that works really well. Try not to have light coming from just one side or you'll get shadow. So let's say maybe you've got a window over here, put a lamp over here so that you get light coming on both sides. There is going to be a slight difference between natural light and artificial light. So you do want to test this out. And the easy thing to do is just have a Zoom call with your spouse. And if your spouse is like mine, she'll be pretty good at telling you what looks bad and what looks good. And if you don't have that, you can also simply record yourself and try different lighting things and then look at the recording to see what works best or not. And I will say one last thing. There is a light that you can now buy. It costs about $50 or so on Amazon, which is as close to a professional quality light that you can get. It can come on a little stand and it's sort of a circular light. Let me just check with my a ring light. Thank you. Teresa just fed the word to me. It's a ring light, and that helps get that sort of all around light that can avoid those shadows.
Oh, wow. Tim, this is so helpful. It has so many notes.
Let me just tell you though, the good thing is it's all recorded, so anybody watching can get it all.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I'll just take one more question from the chat really quick, if that's okay with you. And
Sure.
then anybody else, maybe Rebecca, you can help them by unmuting their phones. So there is a question here that I find fascinating as well, and it says, how many gestures do you recommend in a video conference without turning into a comedian?
Well, let me answer that in a surprising way. There's a reason why comedians use a lot of gestures. It's to keep their audience paying attention. So I would say rather than see how do I avoid becoming a comedian, a better question might be what can I learn about a comedian that works in keeping an audience engaged? Even if your subject is serious. Now, obviously telling jokes is not the appropriate thing, but still there's a lot that you can use. Comedians are animated. They, for the most part, don't just stand there like that, delivering their routine, right? They use emphasis in their voice tone, and they do use their hands more than normal. When you're communicating in a VC, because people are only seeing you inside this little box, use your hands a little more than normal, with one exception. There are some cultures which are very placid and they don't actually use their hands very much. Generally speaking, Korean, Japan, but other cultures as well might find it a little odd if you use your hands too much. But otherwise, I would say for most audiences, use your hands a little more than you normally would in a VC to help your audience stay engaged and not start checking their emails. Oh, and I would actually like to answer one more question that appeared on the chat before we move on. This is a great question. It was, how do I practice these tips that you're giving me? Because you may only do one big virtual presentation a month or once every other week. But these days, the good news is you're probably doing Zoom calls with your colleagues and having even meetings and even chats with your friends on a regular basis. So every time you're doing one of those calls, use it as an opportunity to practice. I would say you can also use as an opportunity to practice in real life things like answering questions in a concise way. Whenever your spouse or whenever your kids or somebody on the phone asks you a question, answer it, give an example, and sum up explaining why it's important. The more you practice this in daily life, the more it'll be there when you're in a real meeting, real conference.
Very good. Now, Rebecca, do we have anyone that may want to ask a question live?
Sure. So I haven't gotten any volunteers yet for the feedback sessions. I myself, though, I do have a question that I'll ask you. And then for others, if you go to the participant box, you'll be able to raise your hand. And we will, at that moment, I'll call on you and we can unmute your audio. And if you're willing, we'll also unmute your video. But I had a quick question, Tim, and it is about all these fancy backgrounds.
Right.
So our university, they have issued a bunch of Zoom backgrounds, such as this one that has our number 7 ranking that we're incredibly fond of. We have this, like field felt a little busy. We also have even a lighthearted one with our really big squirrels on campus. And so I was just curious about your take. This is also my dining room where I work from right now. So what are your thoughts and advice on backgrounds?
Okay, excellent question. So I've been entranced by these Zoom backgrounds, and I think that they are great for more informal meetings or conversations. There's really two problems with them in terms of a professional context. If I was doing a VC as a speaker, I wouldn't want to use one. The first is it gives you a green screen effect. It's pretty obvious that you are sitting against this background because the line that defines your shoulders and head looks a little funny. So for some audiences, they might get sort of entranced by that line. The other thing which I've noticed is sometimes if people move suddenly, a part of their body disappears, for an instance. Why don't you, Becca, if you want to demonstrate that, why don't you just wave one of your arms around for a second? Let's see what happens to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're getting that, right? It suddenly looks like your whole arm is gone. So while that's fascinating and it's kind of funny when you watch it, it would be distracting in a virtual conference.
Yeah. So I don't know if we have any questions from the audience that we want to ask live, but we do have a ton more questions that we could answer from the chat.
Sure, let's do that.
We're gonna, I'm sorry to interrupt quickly. Imran wanted to talk quickly. So I'm gonna unmute Imran's audio and let us know, Imran, if you're willing to share your video as well.
Yeah, sure. I can show, but I don't know. Hi, everybody.
Hi,
how are you? It's amazing getting back, seeing Arceli, because I think we met about 2 years back. I have an input because I've been crisis communication and a student of communication industry. Appearance on the virtual meetings is very, very, very important. It's just like when you are appearing on the screen, you are just like appearing on the television, and your audience need to connect you, and they connect you by seeing you, not only your body language, but your appearance as well. So that has to be, as we've already discussed, the lighting issue and how the leaders connect with their audience. But my point is the appearance is also very important. So this is my input. Anybody can comment on that.
Imran, let me just say, you're absolutely right. You want to make sure that your appearance matches what the occasion calls for. So if it's something more formal, making sure you are nicely and respectfully dressed, that's great. If, on the other hand, it's something more casual, like a team meeting, then maybe you want to model more relaxed dress. The one thing, of course, that's always a risk for people doing VCs is they dress very nicely from the waist up. But who knows what you're wearing from the waist down?
Yes. Yeah, that's very important.
If this hasn't happened to you yet, it will happen. You'll have to do something and you will stand up right in front of your screen.
I tell you, I can
and
share
everybody will see whether or not you're wearing beach shorts or a kimono or a towel or whatever. They'll see that. So dress for a VC from the top all the way down.
Very true. I can share my experience
Please.
I used to come on television, and what we used to do is that we take a lot of shirts and a couple trousers. So trousers are always, we change one or two, but for every scene we used to change our shirts or jackets. So it's always yes, very important that when you are communicating, you have to be totally in that dress from top to bottom.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imran. It's so good to hear from you again. I do have a few more questions I'd like to ask, and I know we're kind of pushing against time, but if you all have the time and wish to stay, as long as Tim has a few more minutes and can answer some more questions, I know we'd love to hear from him. So Tim, there's a question here that is asking about the productivity of a meeting. So there is usually a point in time after which productivity may dip during meetings in person. Is this the same or different for online meetings? And this is a question from Lauren.
Yes, and I would say it will dip earlier in online meetings. There's more of a strain. The group itself gives itself its own energy when you're meeting face to face, and that can carry people through, for example, difficult discussions or technical issues. So if you are in a team that needs to have long discussions, you would be better off to break your meeting up into sections probably of no more than 45 minutes each, I would say. What you could do is you could have a 45-minute long meeting and then break into teams of 2 or 3 for subgroups, where the subgroups could deal with their individual issues, and then agree that you'll have a new call when everybody reports back at a separate time. And that way you can actually be more efficient. And I would say one of the things to do with this diminished ability for people to stay focused in a virtual meeting is only talk about what everybody in the team needs to be in on when the whole team is there, and do those breakouts for individual subgroups so that nobody is ever in a team meeting going like this, waiting for the conversation between others to finish before they have to check back in. That's requiring too much strain. Now, one thing that I think is very interesting is, and you've probably all noticed this yourself, in video conferences, whether on Zoom or Skype or whatever, with friends or certain members of your family, it's actually effortless. You can talk to some people, it's almost as if they're there. You get that great energy flowing back and forth. You can feel really connected with them. But then when it's time for a work call meeting, it's like, you have to force yourself to pay attention sometimes, to really struggle just to stay tuned in. It takes effort. Well, in some ways, that's not surprising. That's why they call it work. The first one, thinking with a friend, you do for free because it's enjoyable. You're being yourself. It's lovely. The second one, somebody has to pay you to do it because it's not something that you would do for free. So it makes sense that you have to expend that extra energy. But you as the meeting manager, you as the meeting employer, can still help your employees get to that kind of communication that is effortless and energetic sooner and easier. And one of the ways is, when you think about it, an actual conversation, there's give and take. It's back and forth. In a one-on-one conversation with a friend, I'm talking about half the time. My friend is talking about half the time. Well, maybe not all my friends, but most of them. In a meeting, people are listening probably closer to 90% and talking only 10%, unless they're the leader. So do what you can to switch that dynamic. Make sure you give people a chance to do breakups when everybody gets to express their points of view. Engagement is going to be the key to having your meeting succeed.
Excellent, excellent. I have one more question, Tim, and it has to do, it's from Melissa, and she's asking, what is the advantage of standing during your presentation versus sitting down?
This is an excellent question. Standing is better in more formal occasions. Like if you're doing a virtual presentation on a topic with a PowerPoint, I would recommend standing whenever possible. Because when you're standing, you yourself have extra energy. It's
Mhm.
easier to be engaged because to speak to a camera takes a lot of energy. So you want to give yourself every edge you can. Also, when you're standing, you can stand a little bit further back from the camera, and that means you can gesture more expressively. Now, if you stand back too far, you may have to use a clicker to advance your slides. And you want to make sure that if you're wired, you don't stand so far back that you risk pulling the computer off. I would say actually just simply get a longer wire would solve that problem, or go wireless. So if, let's say, if it's a presentation where you are talking and everybody else is supposed to listen as opposed to a meeting, stand whenever possible. Now, there's one other thing that I've noticed in standing in Zoom calls and VCs that is important, and that is if you move around, then it looks very jerky. Because although you're moving around a little in real life, camera frames you still pretty tightly. So if I just move this much, let's see if I can demonstrate. If I move back a little bit more, if I just move this much, it seems pretty big across the screen. And if it's not high def, and sometimes it can even seem that your head is sort of going whoosh, whoosh from side to side, and that's distracting. So you don't want to do that. So what you have to do is plant yourself. Don't walk around at all because you'll go off frame. Plant both your feet on the ground as if you're doing yoga. Lean back on your heels and feel yourself sinking in as if your feet are in concrete on the floor, and it makes you feel strong. And then be animated from the waist up.
Wow, those are excellent tips, Tim. Thank you so, so very much. This has been incredibly valuable. You've had wonderful questions and wonderful answers. And I know we're pushing up on time here. So I'd just like to close up by thanking you and just asking you one more question because your job is, I find it fascinating. You get to work with so many leaders from so many different organizations, and you get to do so many different things. So what is it that you're working on right now? Give us some envy.
Yeah. So Teresa and I together are collaborating on a book called Virtually Speaking, How to Communicate When You Can't Meet Face to Face.
Oh boy, nice.
This is, what I would do is I'd invite you guys to make it available to your members who joined or who may see the recording. It's going to be short. We're trying to keep it to about 60, 70 pages. It's just what you need to really succeed at this brand new skill. It's part of an amazing series that I'm helping to put together, a set of books on resilience, which are geared to help people deal with the massive radical changes that this pandemic is going to cause for us. We're just at the beginning of this. Wow. And so we have a book with coping on anxiety, a book with connecting with nature, a book on the life-saving skill of storytelling, a book on planning and adapting in a world where there's so much change. So those should be out, and this is an amazing thing. I've gathered together 10 authors who are each experts in their field. And in the space of 3 weeks, we are having them write, edit, and finalize their manuscript. I'm also a publisher. My publishing company is then going to have them published by early May. So this is going to be 5 weeks from concept to finished books available to the public. I'm so proud of my authors who are working so hard to get these tools to people around the world who really need them. So it's called the Resilience Series, and I hope that you'll help spread the word too.
Oh,
I'd like to say one last thing just in closing, and that is to all of you who tuned in today. This, we're all used to saying this is a difficult time, these are challenging times, and we may in fact be at the beginning. Your role as a leader is going to be even more important, not only for the people who work for you and with you, but for the communities that you serve. So your ability to get out there, be straight with them, and to be aware of the human dimension every single day, how people are suffering, how people depend on lifelines like utilities. That's a burden that you've chose to carry. And if you can carry that and continue to communicate, you can help everybody that you speak find their courage too. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you so very much, Tim. Thank you. This has been fabulous. I don't know how to thank you, really.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for being here with us today. I hope you all enjoyed it. I sure did. I have a ton of notes and I've learned a ton in this short 45 minutes, 50 minutes of webinars. So thank you very much. And well, we look forward to seeing you soon, Tim.